Hello, my name is Adam Gladen, and I am a professor in the Mechanical Engineering Department at North Dakota State University, and I'm here to give you a virtual lab tour. So we'll talk a little bit about my research, what motivates me, a little bit about my teaching. To get you started, I'm in the area of solar thermal energy and energy storage, specifically thermochemical energy storage, and also in utilizing waste heat so we can use that more effectively. So let's get started with the tour. So what motivates my research is the desire to use more renewable energy sources. So we look at this pie chart, we can see where our energy is coming from in the United States. About 37% comes from petroleum, about 32% comes from natural gas, and about 11% comes from coal. These three together are known as fossil fuels, and thus fossil fuels provide about 80% of the energy that we're using in the United States. Renewable energies constitute about 11%, as shown by this little wedge of the pie chart, which is then broken out into its components because there's more than one renewable energy source. Most of the renewable energy in our country comes from hydroelectric, wind, or biomass. My area of expertise, which is solar, is about 9% of that 11%. So there's a lot of growth opportunities for solar energy in the United States still. If we look at historically where does our energy come from, we can see that historically it's come from those fossil fuels, petroleum, natural gas, and coal. Renewables are making some gains. Wind in particular has really grown lately, but you see it's still a pretty small fraction of the overall energy portfolio. So one of the reasons why I'm so interested in using renewable energies is that its potential, particularly solar. Solar has a tremendous amount of potential. In a national lab called Sandia National Lab, which is located in New Mexico, did a calculation that states that every hour and a half, enough energy from the sun strikes the Earth's surface to provide all the energy needs for the world for 1 year. Granted, that's assuming 100% conversion efficiency, so we can take all that energy and convert it to something that we want to use. So that's just a lot of energy that we could be using. So we pare that down a little bit and look at, let's say, just the United States. Let's make something a little bit more realistic assumption and assume that of the sunlight that hits the Earth, we can convert 10% of it into, let's say, electricity, because that's about the conversion efficiency of a solar photovoltaic cell right now. So if you buy a PV panel, you put it up on your roof, you might be able to get 10%, efficiency out of it. So if we assume that, we would need about the area of our state of North Dakota provide all of the energy requirements for the United States. Obviously it's a little bit more challenging than just covering North Dakota and solar panels, but the potential is there to be able to provide a lot of energy with solar. But there are definitely engineering challenges that must be addressed. But what are the challenges? Why are we not doing this? There are a number of challenges, and I'm sure many of you are aware of it. So one of the key ones for renewable energy is spatial variation. So you can see that the sunlight doesn't strike everywhere evenly on the Earth. As you get further to the poles, obviously, you have less solar radiation, especially in the winter when it's tilted away from the sun. And we see here, this is a map put out by NREL, which is another national lab, and it shows where the good solar resources are. And not surprisingly, it's down in the southwest of the United States. If we go up here to the upper Midwest and the New England area, there's not as much solar resources up here, or the Pacific Northwest, right? And it's just because cloud cover and such also affect the solar resources available. So that's a challenge. We also have temporal challenges, which is time. So, the sun only shines during the day, and we need energy at night. So we need to be able to figure out a way to take energy from the day, store it at night. We can also have seasonal changes. And by the way, these also apply a lot to waste heat as well. There's a lot of similarities there. So for example, often we're not continuously producing waste heat. It's only when the facility is running. So let's say, you are melting aluminum to do a cast die of a part. Right? Well, only when you're actually running the melting process are you producing the waste heat. And so it may not be running the same throughout the year, day or night, that kind of a thing. So there's some temporal changes there. There could be spatial changes, spatial variations from one part of the facility to another. And so what we need then is effective storage, and that's where my research comes in. Is how do we effectively store this variable energy source so that we can use it when we want it? Another issue is high initial cost. A lot of renewable energies, they cost a lot to put in, and then you pay it back over time. And so that high initial cost is a barrier to a lot of people investing in it. You think about putting PV cells on your house, or where you live. It costs a lot of money to do that, and you're not going to recoup the cost for 10 years. And so that's just something that might be difficult. So one way to get past that is either to make it work better, so it reduces the amount of time it takes to pay it back, or we make it cheaper, and again, that reduces the time to pay it back. All right, so let's look at my research areas. So I've broken it down into 3 main areas. We'll touch lightly on this. We won't be able to go into all the research that we're working on. We'll just sort of highlight some. So one is solar thermal chemistry. So that's really is how do we use solar energy to drive traditional thermal chemistry. So we have some reactants coming in here. We apply heat. Normally this heat is from burning a fossil fuel, something like that. And I want to bring the heat from the solar energy, produce whatever products we talk about. So what I'll be looking at, one example will be this torrefaction of biomass. Another one, which is energy storage, thermochemical energy storage. So here again, we're taking heat from the sun. We use that to drive a chemical reaction. So we have this chemical substance here, which is made up of two other chemicals, A and B. We use the heat to drive the 2 species apart. We store these separately, and then when we want the heat back, we bring them back here, and we produce heat coming out. So this is kind of like a thermal battery. We put the heat in, we run the reaction, we want the energy back, we reverse the reaction, and it releases the energy, so it's storing it in the chemical bonds between substance A and B. And then a last area that I work on is system design. So these are primarily for distributed solar thermal systems, or systems that capture and reuse waste heat. So here's an example here of a waste heat system that we're working on designing. This is a combined solar photovoltaic system that we've been doing some analysis on as well. And then my research does both numerical and experimental work. So numerical work is working at a computer, and we simulate it. We have mathematical models that we use to predict how a system would do or how a reaction would perform. And then we go out and we experimentally validate that. We conduct experiments to determine the effect of various parameters. Eventually we might build systems and test those out as well. And so I'll be showing a lot of pictures and stuff that are on the experimental side, because the computational side, is mostly done on a computer. All right, so quick virtual view of my labs. This is my lab, which is located in Dovey Hall, which is the mechanical engineering building here at NDSU. I'll look a little quickly at some of the facilities we see here, but we have some center tables. We have a furnace on there. We have gas cylinders for the different gases that we might use, fume hoods and such. Let's look at some of the equipment. So a high temperature furnace. So this is a tube furnace here. You'll see that in a video. So the nice thing about this is we can control, a lot of times we're talking about reactions, right? So we want to control the environment in which the reaction is going on. So we can put in different gases in here. So these are mass flow controllers down here that control the gases going into this tube furnace. And then this furnace heats up. I can go up to about 1200 degrees Celsius, so it can get very hot. So it's a nice high temperature, stable furnace for us to use. Then we have some other equipment. So this is a TGA, thermogravimetric analyzer. So we put in a sample in here, and it heats the sample off, and it measures very, very accurately the weight change. So you think about those dissociation reactions I was talking about for thermochemical energy storage, so we're breaking off A and B. Well, a lot of times A, let's say, will stay a solid, B is a gas. And so then if we put A and B together and that's a solid, and we heat it up and B leaves as a gas, we can measure the weight change to determine the reaction rates. Another thing I use is this system over here, which is a combined DSC TGA. So DSC is digital scanning calorimetry, and a TGA is thermogravimetric analyzer. So what that does is it measures both the weight change and the amount of energy required to do that weight change. So again, if we're looking at the energy stored in the chemical bonds, we want to be able to measure that energy that it takes to drive, let's say, species B off of A. And then we have this hydration system. I highlight this because This is a system that was designed and built by some undergraduate researchers here at NDSU, and they did a really good job on that. We use that quite a bit. So we'll see that a little bit later on. And then one area that I'm getting into is hydrogen fuel cells and ethanol fuel cells. So we have a fuel cell tester there that we're kind of collaborating with as well. That's also in the lab, among other equipment. So this is just some of the equipment that's in the lab. Back here, you can also see data acquisition systems that we have that used to measure temperatures and flow rates and stuff. Those are all incorporated into a lot of these systems. All right, so let's dive into some of the research that's being done. So we'll start with thermochemical energy storage. So again, it's like a thermal battery. So we take heat, we use that heat to drive a chemical reaction. When we want the energy back, we reverse the reaction, and it releases the heat. So storing the chemical bonds between species A and species B. So why is this interesting is one is that it has really high energy density. So that means that we can fit a lot of energy in a very small space, which is advantageous. We don't want to be taking up a lot of space, just like you don't want a giant battery hanging off of your phone. You want a smaller phone. Same thing here is we're talking about a lot of energy for solar to provide space heating for a building. Let's say it takes a lot of energy, and so the smaller volume that we need to store that energy, the better. And the other thing is that we can have long-term storage with minimal losses. So we can, because it's stored in the chemical bonds, we can separate those two, and we can let them sit there for about as long as we want, and then we bring them back together when we want it. So it has you could have a long shelf life essentially. All right, so let's look at this. So one of the reactions. So I was just drawing generic, species A and B. One of them that's of interest is hydroscopic salt. So that just means that hydroscopic means that it likes water. It absorbs or adsorbs water. So this is used for low temperature heat because the reactions proceed at around 100 degrees Celsius. So they're stored in the enthalpy of adsorption. So we have a salt and we have water absorbed onto the salt. We add heat and that drives the water vapor off the salt. So it's kind of like boiling. It takes energy to boil water. It takes energy to drive the water off of the salt. We want it reversed. We put water vapor. So this is a gaseous water vapor. And flow past the salt absorbs the water and releases the heat. And so we have here is that hydration system that we discussed earlier. And I'll show a little video of it in use. And so this is one way that we test. So we have the mass flow controllers here. So those flow water, gas. Some of the gas goes through. This is a column of water that you're looking at right now. So that hydrates the gas, and then we mix the two streams together. And then we send it to our sample chamber right here, which has got that orange plug in it. Again, we're measuring the humidity of the water vapor this whole time. This whole thing is controlled by a computer over here. You can see Rajiv, which is one of my students, at the control. So we control the flow rates, and we can specify the different hydration levels. So you can see you just changed it. And if you look at the graph on the left of the computer screen, you'll see the black line start to drop. There it goes. And so that he just dropped the humidity in the chamber. So we can control the humidity, and the humidity is the amount of water vapor present. So that allows us to control that water vapor and hydrate or dehydrate the salt. So now there's some challenges with this right now, which is heat and mass transfer limitations. So in other words, we can't heat up quickly enough, or we can't remove heat quickly enough, or we can't get the water vapor there quickly enough. And then stability is another big thing. Look at this. So one way that we're approaching stability is we're looking at developing a new salt material. So you can see up here we have the pure salt, and then we cycle it in a hydration chamber. So this is before the hydration chamber, and then we send it through some cycles, and this is after. And you can see here how it's like agglomerated and stuck together, and that reduces the energy density. So we can see on this chart here, this is that pure salt going down here, and we have, so remember, storing the enthalpy of the hydration reaction, and that's decreasing because we're agglomerating. We don't have as much salt that we can interact with, so it's becoming less effective. But we have introduced this new CNC, which is cellulose nanocrystals, into the salt, and that provides a structure for the salt. So this is what this SEM image down here is that the black area is salt crystals, and then the really faint lines are cellulose nanocrystals that are going through it, and those provide structure, and they keep the salt crystals apart, so that when we look at it before and after cycling, it looks exactly the same, and our energy is also relatively stable. And so that's a very good thing that we can provide stability for the salt through the cellulose nanocrystals. Another thing we're looking at doing is that if it's heat and mass transfer limited, one way we can affect that is by producing the geometry that we want to maximize the heat transfer and mass transfer. And we're looking at doing that through 3D printing. So what structure could we print? So if we look down here at this figure, these blue circles would represent the salt, and we would print the salt in cylinders. So cylinders would be going in and out of the board, let's say. And then we have flow or water vapor over that, and then we can control the size of the cylinders, we can control the number of cylinders, or the porosity, which is the ratio of void area, so this area in here where there's no cylinders, to the total volume of solid end cylinders. So that's what we're looking at here, is predicting, okay, well, if we could print it, which we're looking at how do we print it, what would we want to print? So we're doing some computational work to predict, okay, well, if we have this porosity, this is, and this size, cylinder, that's what we're looking at here with the millimeter size of different diameters of cylinders. What do we want to print? Do we want 1 millimeter with, 50% porosity, 2 millimeters with 10%, with 40% porosity, and we can try to predict that. We also are looking at some CFD modeling here, so this is predicting the flow around these cylinders of solid salt to, again, identify what could we print. All right, so the last area of research that I want to discuss is the system design. So I work with a number of different thermal systems, primarily distributed solid systems. All right, to try to make systems that work better or cheaper than what's currently available. So I've looked at researching systems for waste heat capture. So that's this over here. That's some ongoing research. I've looked at systems for combined photovoltaic thermal systems, but what we'll focus on today is this remote cooling system that we are designing. So we're partnering with the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish, and Parks, and what they wanted is they want a system to allow them to cool a small portion of a mountain stream to provide cool habitat for trout fish if the water temperature gets too hot. So what they do is they go out and they stock their streams with trout. And then some years it gets too hot and the water temperature gets too hot and they have large kill off of trout, which isn't desirable. Fishermen don't want to see dead fish flowing down the river. And then it also costs them money to have to restock it. And so what we're thinking about using is, can we cool a small, pool in the stream to allow a place for the fish to go during the hottest part of the summer to increase the survival rate of the stocked fish. And so we're designing a system for them, and we'll be putting it out in the Black Hills of South Dakota eventually to test this system. But it takes a lot of energy. It's a lot of water. Water takes a lot of energy to cool. So it's a very challenging design to do. And of course, we don't have any power out there, so it's going to be provided by solar energy. So one of the things we need to do is we need to figure out how to effectively remove energy from the stream. And so what we've done is we've built a scaled replica of the stream to test different prototypes. So you can see the pictures on here. So here's some of my students, Rajiv and Sarah, where they're conducting an experiment. And then this up here is the stream that we've designed and built. This is actually designed by senior design team here at NDSU, so a group of undergraduate senior students designed this. We had the South Dakota Game and Fish take measurements out at the stream location, and then we scaled that down properly using non-dimensionalization to get to this system here that we can use, and we put in prototypes like this prototype here. So here's a prototype heat exchanger. We put it in there, we flow it over there. We can measure the temperature of the stream, and we can also measure the temperature of the cooling water. So we have here is this copper. There's cooling water flowing through these copper tubes right here. And so by measuring the inlet temperature of the water and the outlet temperature of the cooling water, we can determine how much heat we remove from the system. Take a look at it in action here. So here's the stream flowing. And as we move up it, you'll be able to see the different contours, and those contours reflect what the actual contours are of the stream. And it's a pretty big system. There's Sarah there down there taking some data collections. And then there's our prototype. So you can see in there the rods with tags on it have thermocouples attached, or thermistors attached to them, so we're measuring the temperature of the water upstream and downstream of our heat exchanger design that we have in there. And the graph here on my right, your right as you look at it, that is the inlet and outlet temperature of the cooling water as it comes into the heat exchanger and out of the heat exchanger. So you can see it comes in with the blue and it leaves with this orange color, and so we are removing energy from the stream. We're cooling the stream down. And then down here is a CFD analysis that we're looking at different heat exchanger designs. So this one pictured is a flat plate. We are going to be moving to a tube bank type design where we have these white circles down here are tubes, like copper tubes. So there'd be water flowing, cooling water flowing through there. It'd be going back and forth into and out of the slide as you or the video screen here. And then the water would be coming this way. So this would be the direction that the stream is flowing, and starts out red as the hottest, and as it goes through the tube bank, it cools down, and we're looking for that 5-6 degrees cooling is what we're trying to accomplish. All right, so that's where we're working on designing that system. All right, so we'll wrap up by teaching. So I teach thermal courses here at NDSU, so thermodynamics, heat transfer, thermal systems lab, and I teach a number of graduate courses over the years. So here's some pictures of our thermal systems lab, ME457. So we have our pumping losses lab, so we can measure the pressure drop through here, through this pipe, or through different bends. So that's an important engineering to determine what size of pump you need. We also have a refrigeration lab that represents like your refrigerator at home, how those operate, so we can measure flow rates and cooling effect on that. And then we also have a compressible flow lab, so this would be like supersonic flow through a nozzle, so we can get to, I think about Mach 1.2 is what the flow is through there, and we can measure the force and the velocity and such of the jet coming out of a nozzle. So those are some of the courses that I teach. I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators, so Dr. Azarmi here at NDSU, Dr. Bajwa, Dr. Krishnan, and then Jeremy Kentz at South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. And the number of my students, I've just listed some of them that have worked on it. So Mike Backer and Alan Peralt and Rajeep and Haley and Dylan and Sarah. So a number of people are working on this. It's really them that are doing all the heavy lifting. So if you have any more if you have any questions or you'd like to talk to me more about it, please shoot me an email. I'd be happy to tell you more about my research, and then I'll also just highlight some of the organizations that have sponsored the research in my lab as well. Hopefully I'll hear from you soon. Enjoy the rest of your lab tours.